Hi, greetings from Germany. My name is Luigi Filieri and I am the Ade Prime Postdoctoral Fellow at the Kant Forschungsstelle of the Johannes Gutenberg Universität Mainz. My aim in this short video is to deal with Kant's chapter on the schematism of the pure concepts of the understanding in the analytical principles of the critique of pure reason. One first remark is that the schematism chapter in the analytical principles is no isolated case, not even in the first critique. Think, for example, of the schematism of the ideas and the ideal in the dialectic, and the schematism of pure reason in the architectonic. As for the second critique, the typic of pure practical judgment is meant to solve a problem that is analogous to that of cognitive schematism. And the third critique comes up with the schematism without concept, paragraph 35, when Kant is accounting for the possibility of reflective judgments of taste. So schematism is no peripheral issue, but rather the first procedural requirement for the possibility of a priori synthesis. As Kant claims, as early in 1781, that the possibility of synthetic a priori judgments is the most fundamental task of a critique of pure reason in general, he is actually raising two claims. The first is that a priori synthesis is the legislative core function of pure reason's critical employments, and the normative source of its domains, nature and freedom. The second is that a priori synthesis takes place in form of judgments. And every time Kant argues for the possibility and legitimacy of synthetic a priori judgments, he appeals to different kinds of schematic procedures. So it is important to understand that schematism is the first procedural requirement for the possibility of a priori synthesis, and that all occurrences of schematism always concern a specific employment of the power of judgment. The activity of reason in the domains of nature and freedom relies on a unique methodological point, the transition from reason's pure a priori elements and principles to transcendental moral, aesthetic, and teleological laws, up to their overarching unity in one system. So they claim that all doctrines of schematism relate to a specific employment of the power of judgment. Thus entails another fundamental claim, namely that schematism always involves the articulation of reason's pure a priori elements and principles, which take on an operational shape according to their respective schematic procedure and their related judgmental application. Whenever a schematic procedure takes place, the elements and principles of pure reason take on an operational shape, allowing them to be effective for the constitution of reason's legislative domains. And in order to establish these domains, reason must proceed synthetically by establishing objective laws. So in our case, the schematism chapter in the analytical principles, we are dealing with the possibility of specific kinds of judgments determining cognitive judgments, namely the principles of the understanding, the laws of possible experience and cognition. In order to make full sense of cognitive schematism, we have to recall the distinction between denken, thinking, and erkennen, cognizing. B146. The categories per se are not enough to ground cognition, for also intuitions are required. And as the power of judgment, alongside with the imagination, performs their connection, this requires us to articulate the pure forms of thinking according to the form of the space, the inner sense, where intuitions actually take place, and this form is time. So the problem of schematism is to bring into time something that is originally not into time, or say differently, to move from the synthesis intellectualis to the synthesis speciosa, being 151. The argument of the schematism chapter consists in proving that the pure forms of thinking, the categories, acquire objective reality by being temporally schematized when applied to intuitions. And the operational shape of the categories, namely the fact that they can be lawfully applied to intuitions and work as rules for cognition, follows from this schematization. This schematization does not correspond to the production of alleged representations called schemata, and indeed notice that Kant does not mention schemata in his own classification of representations, the so-called Stufenleiter at A320. Rather, schemata refer to a synthetic procedure, a method of temporal hybridization of the forms of thinking, whose field of action is in principle not restricted to sensible intuitions. Moreover, since the categories and our sensible intuitions are heterogeneous, a mediation is needed in order to bridge the gap between these two kinds of representations, coming from different faculties. The problem of heterogeneity is solved precisely by hybridizing the categories. And while the deduction in the analytic of concepts has to show that the categories can lawfully relate to intuitions, the schematism chapter in the analytic of principles shows how this reference actually works. And the actual reference is a task the power of judgment performs. To apply the categories is to judge according to these rules. And the application of the categories, seen from the point of view of sensibility, so to say, corresponds to the subsumption of intuitions themselves under the categories. And Kant indeed writes that by means of the schematism, the application of the categories to intuitions, which is at the same time the subsumption of intuitions under the categories, sensibility both realizes and restricts the understanding. B. 187. So the temporal hybridization of the categories suggests that the pure form of thinking, which are not in themselves empirically real, work as rules of cognition if and only if they are articulated according to the form of the inner sense, namely time. Productive imagination can be said to be hybrid as well, both receptive and spontaneous. The arousal of this function is to be understood in the context of the connection between sensibility and understanding the power of judgment is performing, and the system of the understanding's a priori principles follows directly from this. So it is one thing to have some undetermined manifold given in intuition, another to have at one's disposal the pure concept quantity, and yet another is to apply the latter concept to the former intuition. The scheme of quantity, the notion of number, is a temporal hybrid we need in order to establish a principle of the understanding, for example, an axiom of intuition. Claiming that every object is an extensive magnitude amounts to claiming that every given manifold ought to be cognized and experienced as an extensive magnitude. This is the actual application of the categories and the origin of the principles of the understanding. The end of the process lies in the empirical, yet still cognitively lawful claim that extensive magnitude is a tree. By way of conclusion, I would like to share with you the very essential interpretive text on Kant's schematism. Obviously, the list is not exhaustive, yet all these contributions provide relevant insights into a complex and sometimes controversial topic. So the first one, I proceed in alphabetical order, is Mario Caimi, The Logical Structure of Time, according to the chapter on the schematism in Kant Studien, 2012. Karin de Boer has a paper titled Categories versus Schemata, Kant's Two-Aspect Theory of Pure Concepts and His Critique of Wolffian Metaphysics, Journal of the History of Philosophy, 2016. Klaus Dusing in German, Schema und Einbildungskraft in Kants Kritik der reinen Vernunft. This is a collection published in 2013. Alfredo Ferrerin, Construction and Mathematical Schematism, Kant on the Exhibition of a Concept in Intuition, Kant Studien 1995. Claudio La Rocca, in German, Schematismus und Anwendung, Kant Studien 1989. Samantha Mathern, Kant and the Art of Schematism in Kantian Review 2014. And also, finally, Gerhard Seel edited the items Schema and Schematisms des reinen Verstandes in the recently published Kant Lexicon in 2012. So thank you very much for your attention and time, and best wishes from Germany. Bye.